Welcome to More Than DNA, Epigenetics in the Fight for Global Health Equity. So really quickly about myself and why I'm here today. My name is Yasmine Biyashev, and I'm a rising senior at Walter Payton College Prep in Chicago, Illinois. I've been pretty passionate about both STEM and humanities my whole life, so I'm a big fan of interdisciplinary learning and fields which can be approached from multiple perspectives. For this reason, I love that global health manages to bridge my interests and also aims to advance greater social equity. This is my second summer researching at Northwestern University's Dermatology Lab and upcoming third year organizing Chicago Public Schools' annual Gender Equity for Teens conference. I also head Payton's Sexuality Education and Activism Council and one day hope to go into women's health. First things first, epigenetics are not the same thing as your genes. They are better explained as how our body reads DNA. BBC's Martha Enriquez explains really well the role of epigenetics and how they kind of function in a 2019 article as tiny chemical tags that are added or removed from our DNA in response to changes in our living environment and behaviors. These tags turn genes on or off, which serve to adapt our bodies to changing conditions without permanently changing our genomes. Another explanation of epigenetics that I find extremely helpful uses the familiar phrase nature versus nurture. So basically, if genetics in your DNA represent the nature aspect of our bodies, personalities, and predispositions, epigenetics would represent the nurture side and how our environments and behaviors influence our bodies, personalities, and predispositions. Another important thing to keep in mind is that as our environments and habits change over the course of our lives, our epigenetics can change too, and these changes are reversible up to an extent. For example, someone may be born with a low genetic risk of developing lung cancer, but if they work in manufacturing or if they're a lifelong smoker, they would end up having a higher risk of developing lung cancer regardless of their genetics. Some other important examples of lifestyle factors that modify epigenetic patterns include diet, exposure to pollutants, and psychological or physical stress. Epigenetics directly affect how old our genes are read to be through DNA methylation, which has to do with the presence of the tiny tags I mentioned earlier. Diet is extremely important in reading our lifespan since folate and other B vitamins are important for DNA metabolism, which is required for processing methylation even as early as in utero. As far as pollutants go, we understand that they create negative health effects in a variety of ways, but they also impact methylation. Human studies in India looked at blood samples and blood DNA samples from those exposed to toxic levels of arsenic and found decreased levels of methylation, which was confirmed by another Bangladeshi study that looked at chronic arsenic exposure. Another physical environmental factor that may be limited by the presence of pollutants is sunlight. So greater exposure to sunlight actually is shown to lower your mortality rate through your epigenetic expression. Lastly, stress consistently produces negative epigenetic changes. And stress is produced in a variety of ways. So in particular, lack of social interactions in neglectful environments increases pro-inflammatory responses in individuals. But going back to how epigenetic changes are reversible to an extent, practices such as meditation or other forms of mindfulness are actually shown to decrease inflammation. Generational trauma is also an epigenetic stress phenomenon that's being widely researched at the moment. There are studies using health records from the American Civil War to the Holocaust that all point to evidence that PTSD and other epigenetic markers can be passed down. Even famine as a form of biological and social stressor has been shown to be reproduced in real life and animal control experiments. One of the original examples which demonstrated this was during World War II in the Netherlands. There was a period of time known as the Hunger Winter, where Dutch citizens were forced to survive on a third of their caloric intake, and generations born to the survivors afterwards consistently grew smaller and were more susceptible to diseases of metabolism like diabetes due to the epigenetic expression. A founding principle of global health is the pursuit of equity and global physical well-being. We are so commonly taught to believe that our genetics determine our health and define our lives. But when the environment we engage in and our daily actions have the same potential to alter the course of our physical and mental health on a biological level, epigenetics must be an important part of the global health conversation. We have such little control over our immediate environment in the age of globalization, and issues such as worker exploitation through long shifts and hazardous conditions, environmental justice, and really anything that produces negative and inequitable conditions does cause epigenetic modifications and creates yet another obstacle for socioeconomically disadvantaged groups to face. This also has extreme economic ramifications, since affording adequate treatments and healthcare is often impossible or difficult for those living in poverty who deal with the worst cases of everyday environmental hazards and epigenetic changes, which often entraps them and their families in greater cycles of debt. There is no way to pursue the goals of global health without considering epigenetics and the importance of environmental factors on our well-being. For the fun stuff, looking into the future, we have considerable hope for how epigenetics can be greater incorporated into healthcare and the development of treatments. Epigenetic therapy is an umbrella term for the use of drugs or other techniques to treat medical concerns which are highly impacted by epigenetic conditions, since they would allow for a greater pathway to influence these factors directly. Cancer is currently a critical disease in which epigenetic therapies are being used and further researched, since methylation plays a large role in cancer development. These therapies right now seem to be working very well alongside chemotherapy and radiation, often preventing tumors from returning. Another current example of exciting epigenetic therapy is in schizophrenic treatment, which has shown to provide drastic improvements. Lastly, a more science fiction play on the epigenetic future is hopes that we can use epigenetic therapy to reverse methylation, causing biological effects to reverse the aging process or stop or even slow it down. However, as a quick disclaimer, as new epigenetic therapies and technologies are discovered and approved, it is crucial to keep in mind that there are already pre-existing inequities in receiving healthcare. Those who are unable to afford new and improved treatments are typically individuals who are exposed to unhealthy environmental factors in the first place and need them just as much. Research and development in epigenetic therapy and technology is extremely important and goes into saving lives, but eradicating the root of global health inequities should go hand in hand to create larger changes. Here are my referenced works and the studies from the presentation. My email is also at the bottom of the page in case you would like to contact me with any questions or comments. I would absolutely love to hear from you. In closing, I would like to thank Mr. Torres from Walter Payton High School, as well as the Global Health Conference team for providing me with this opportunity, as well as the audience for your time listening and learning with me this evening. Thank you.